The following video was recorded during ARCVic's 2015 OCD and Anxiety Week seminar. To see more segments from this exciting yearly event, or to learn more about ARCVic's helpline, support group, recovery programs, and community and professional education training, please visit the ARCVic website at www.arcvic.org.au.
Now, our next speaker is Rod Carne, and it's interesting, I was actually just looking back through the program, and I promise I didn't do this deliberately, but it's almost like we often refer to ourselves as the ARCVic family, and all of our three speakers have either worked at ARCVic or volunteered at ARCVic and still have an ongoing relationship, so I think it was pretty amazing actually when we sort of put the program together. So I'd like to introduce Rod. Rod has worked as a clinical psychologist over the last 30 years, for most part in the child and adolescent mental health services at Geelong Hospital, Royal Children's Hospital, La Trobe Hospital and at the Monash Medical Centre. He's also worked in private practice in Burwood and at the West Gippsland Paediatric Service in Warragul. Rob was one of the instigators and coordinators of the OCD and Anxiety Disorders program at Monash Medical Centre from 1996 to 2005 and has made and maintained a continuing interest in anxiety disorders and autism spectrum disorders among children and adolescents, and has a very long standing association with ARCVic, which we're very grateful for. Please welcome Rod to talk about separation anxiety. Thank you.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I'll need that. Thanks, Michelle. Thank you for inviting me and introducing me. I'm going to talk about separation anxiety. I'll take a few deep breaths, Lisa, too. And it was an amazing way to open today. So much so that it's thrown me into a little bit of disarray about how I should deliver my presentation. So bear with me if I'm moving backwards and forwards with the slides. I will say, in respect of Lisa talking about her experience, I think it was when I was sitting down at a meeting similar to this that it occurred to me, and I'm going to claim this for myself, others have probably said it in a different way, but I would say that personal experience has thousands of excellent authors and few experts, and science has thousands of excellent experts and few authors, and I suppose clinical work sits somewhere in between the two. So I am going to talk about separation anxiety, and I think my talk will be, and it will seem, certainly to me, a little bit clinical and technical. So I hope you'll bear with me with that, because some of the terms that we have are to try and bring some precision and some generalisability so that we can take the richness and meaning of an individual's experience and put it into something that can apply much more generally. And so I'm attempting to do that, and I anticipate it may sound a bit technical at points. Now, how do I do? Let me try this. Usually ding means you've got the right answer, not the wrong one. That's right. I hope you don't have to speak up again. So, separation anxiety. And I think we all have an understanding of separation anxiety, and it's a disorder that is most commonly identified with young children and adolescents. It's perhaps interesting to note that the DSM-5 has included adults in the disorder, given that the primary feature is excessive anxiety about, you don't need to browse those. Oh, I forgot to say that. I put my email, see, you throw me into disarray. I put my email at the bottom there, because if you would like, given how disorganised it's going to be, if you would like to read the text so that you can sort of listen, I'm very happy for you to email me, or I'm happy to email you, Michelle, the text, so you can read it at your leisure and work out what I was trying to say. Anyhow, that's what you'll find if you look in the DSM, and it essentially is saying that there's an excessive amount of distress and anxiety about the imminent separation from home or primary caregivers. Now, I was going to talk about the concept of anxiety, but listening to Lisa, probably very sensibly, she's encouraged me to think I will talk more about, a little bit about the origins of anxiety. And I'll shuffle my papers. Because before considering the concept of anxiety, what it is and why it's so problematic, and before considering treatment, which I'll talk about after I talk about the concept of anxiety, I propose to consider a couple of questions with implications for separation anxiety. We understand fear about realistic dangers because the risk of harm is real. However, why is it that humans are prone to such severe anxiety about possibility and about losing control? Why is anxiety so resistant to logic and reason and to the support of caregivers? Because it is. When it becomes what we call a disorder, again, another term that sounds horrible, but I'm going to try and give it a meaningful face that might make it seem at least something that we can draw some specific understanding from. Anyway, they're complex questions, probably involve several factors: genetics, learning, family environment, life events, sensitivities and the like, and other vulnerabilities, various difficulties that individuals can bring along with them, learning difficulties, social difficulties, etc., physical illness, etc. However, one theory that academics have considered for the origin of human anxiety as a concept examines what Freud termed the birth trauma. That sounds pretty good too. And it's not meant to be, I believe, taken literally. It's a term that highlights the initial separation from the mother as the child emerges from the womb, onwards as the child separates progressively into the world. The constant interplay between our need to express ourselves and step out as individuals and the sometimes competing need to remain securely in reach of trusted others creates a potential tension that can trigger anxiety. Freud again said in this context, anxiety is the fundamental human condition. This concept of competing needs and the balance of those competing needs places anxiety as existing along a what I'll call a dynamic, changeable continuum with absolute individuality at one end. We could call that exclusion or isolation or abandonment, if you like. And all the way to the other end where there might be absolute protection, which we might call enmeshment or stuckness. Rather than being, therefore, a permanent, unchanging medical condition, anxiety can be seen as subject to change over time. It can range from what I'll call comfortable anxiety order at one end, less comfortable anxiety order, all the way through to disruptive anxiety disorder. And I think that this is a positive thing because it enables us to understand that anxiety can change over time and that it can be positively influenced. Now, backwards. Okay. I want to just spend, you keep me on track with time, thanks. I want to just spend a few minutes talking about definitions, which again is, not terribly rich with experience and what individuals can bring. But I think it's helpful if we're going to talk about what's the difference between because we all know worry, we all know fear, we all know anxiety. The terms are often used interchangeably. And if we're going to have such a thing as anxiety disorder, we want to be able to distinguish it from other terms that seem to be similar and can confuse the difference between these things. And it's the difference that helps us to focus on what we have to deal with when anxiety becomes a problem. Now, the term worry. Worry is reserved for situations where there's a doubt about an important outcome, something we value becomes uncertain. Will I pass the exam? Will I win the race? Will Susie or Billy make it home from the concert? Will the home loan be approved? Often worry and concern are in fact motivators, and they are managed without external support. It's worry. Fear. Fear is reserved for those situations where there's a realistic imminent danger. There's a snake in the lounge room, robber in the house, not a noise outside or a shadow, a robber in the house, or a wild dog in the backyard. The treatment for fear is to take protective action. In the case of the snake or dog, jump the couch or the fence. Fear is a very distressing emotion, but it's fairly simple to treat. And most often it's time limited. As soon as you have jumped the fence, assuming the dog cannot, the fear is resolved. It is frightening, but generally not problematic. Now, the term anxiety, because I'm going to distinguish, and people have talked about normal anxiety. That's not usually a word in the psychologist's lexicon, normal, but normal anxiety and what we might call anxiety disorder. And because anxiety is we know, and it's seen to be a universal experience, we want to understand the difference. So the term anxiety refers to those times when we confront a possibility that seems unthinkable and intolerable and causes a shudder. Just the thought of it happening. Usually we can calm down naturally as we re-establish that the threat is only a very slight, unrealistic possibility. Packed with emotion, but not an imminent danger. This is something we can all encounter. However, our experience of normal anxiety is usually fleeting. and the individual is able to keep in mind what is happening and what is realistic in terms of actual danger versus a threatening possibility. Anxiety. Now, this is my piece de resistance about clinical terms. Neurotic, sorry about that. But I'm saying it with, I believe, purpose. What we're interested in today, and when we speak about anxiety disorder, I'm saying it's up that end of the continuum, is more specifically termed abnormal or neurotic anxiety. Now, I don't mean neurotic in a colloquial, perhaps disparaging way, as the term is sometimes used. Don't be neurotic, sort of. It doesn't have that meaning. While it appears as if the threat here in neurotic anxiety is also about some frightening possibility, harm, failure, death, and the like, in the case of neurotic, what I'll call gripping anxiety, it is something slightly different. In the case of the more severe anxiety, the threat seems to penetrate into the core of our being and becomes as much an internal feeling. The threat here seems to go inwards and is no longer objective or available to reason and observation. This more disruptive experience of anxiety is often described by sufferers as something diffuse, unclear, hard to put into words. I know this from experience talking. It's very common for those with anxiety. It's hard to put into words. A looming dread, a sense of foreboding, being close to the edge. Most commonly, it is described in some way as a feeling. I'm going to propose that normal anxiety is not so much, it is to a certain extent, but not in the same way. Whereas we say we are afraid or fearful or worried about something, an unwanted event, for example, we tend to say we are anxious or we feel anxious. And the feeling in severe anxiety can perhaps be best summarised as the sense of losing control. Not losing control of our bike or our exam or our bowels. Yeah, sorry about that. Is the cause for anxiety though. More like losing control of control. The sense of disaster is about not being able to be in control. There is, in turn, an overwhelming need to restore the sense of being in control. So the hallmark of anxiety disorder is the effort that goes into restoring control by removing a frightening possibility from our conscious awareness. Not facing and resolving it, removing it. The effort involved is not just because of the worrying possibility, embarrassment, harm, failure. Rather, the effort is also due to our need to protect against this sense of losing control. There are a number of methods which are often called, again, clinically symptoms or defences that are called upon for the purpose of removing or escaping such frightening awareness. Primarily children who have this gripping anxiety where there's a need to remove awareness. Obviously, avoidance and escape are very common, and particularly in the idea of separation. I'm not going. I don't want to do netball. You must not go out, Mum. I'm not catching the train. This defence is very prominent and relied upon to avoid the distressing experience of separation. Forgetting or repressing thoughts or possibilities. Forgetting the homework book. Kids often forget the homework book, less often the iPod or the Xbox. And it's not always that they don't bring their homework because they've forgotten it, but when they do, it's often because the actual problem of the homework, which might be something like I'm worried it'll be too hard, is there, and it's temporarily forgotten, along with the homework book. Children construct magical actions that serve to remove awareness. These actions are meaningless in reality. If I tap 3 times, Mum and Dad will not have a crash. If I wash my hands, I'll not get sick. If I ask Mum to ensure it's okay, then nothing can go wrong. There is a logic to compulsive actions. A meaningless act will not resolve a realistic danger. A meaningless act can remove an imagined danger. I did my action, so the possibility will not happen. If I don't do my action, it will then more likely happen. This makes sense and works if the danger is not really real. This highlights a very important principle of anxiety. The meaning that generates anxiety is intensely personal. It's a threat because of what it means to the individual, not what it means on any measure of realistic logic. I've heard parents say a lot of the time, I think Billy's having a lend of us. We can't touch his plate, we have to wash our hands all the time before there's any food. And at the footy, he puts his hand in the orange bucket and he has an orange like everyone else. How come? There's more danger of germs, etc. in the orange bucket at half time than there is with us all. Or Billy again. Billy needs to be in with Mum and Dad on the lilo by the bed, and they are saying, Billy, what's the difference? If a robber's here, if you're just on the other side of that wall in your bed and you yell out for us, there's no difference to you being there when the robber arrives and yelling out to us. There's a slight difference, but parents often think in trying to encourage them. And of course, there is a big difference in both those situations, and it is that the meaning that the child gives. So we could say in football and something that's fun and they feel very confident and assured, the idea of harm doesn't come to their mind. They don't even think about it. At home, the sense of insecurity, if you like, occurs. It's got nothing to do with the chance of contracting a germ. So meaning makes the experience of anxiety intensely personal, and we shouldn't be disparaging when we think that's ridiculous. And of course we often do resort to say that's silly. Now I'm going to move forward now and talk a little bit about what we do. In talking about what we do, I'm going to spend more time talking a little bit about what parents or others who are supporting individuals, because I'm talking in terms of separation mostly with young children and adolescents, and there are more people who are in a support position or parents here today than children. And even if there are those who are interested in anxiety from what the individual does to help themselves, I think it's relevant to also think about the perspective of the parent trying to be helpful. Before I talk about this, I just want to make a qualification. Maybe it's a bit of an out. When I talk about anxiety, I realise that sometimes the difference between anxiety and fear cannot always be entirely clear. Let's say bullying. I would say that with bullying, that's not anxiety, that's fear. If you're going to school every day and you're being circled by a group and they're pushing you and etc., then that's fear, and we need to protect an individual in that situation. Anxiety, on the other hand, is about exposing to the situation. So I understand that at the margin, sometimes that might be difficult to be entirely clear about. And also there could be other vulnerabilities that are contributing to someone's anxiety that also need to be taken into account, as I said earlier. And as Lisa touched on, anxiety often is shared in a relationship. So there can be anxiety in those around the individual with anxiety. All these things complicate it and deserve a talk on their own merit. Difficult, complex cases of anxiety, what do we do? That's a separate talk. I'm hoping to concentrate on what we do when we are dealing with anxiety, so we can be clear about that, understanding that it can be more complex. You'll get to read all of this if you wish. I'm just going to say something briefly about the fundamental problem. How am I going? Okay. The fundamental problem. If I can find it, bear with me. Because this is what we need to address. I just talked briefly about the types of defences that children naturally bring to that more gripping type of anxiety. Psychological mechanisms to remove the threat and restore a sense of order. Like any disease, anxiety is brewing before we notice it. And particularly, these defences are well in place by the time youngsters present for assistance. This means they're already committed to a means of escape and avoidance. And of course, avoidance will perpetuate and accentuate the anxiety, not resolve it. The immediate success of the avoidance in facing worrying threat means children become quickly reliant on it. They feel exposed and vulnerable with any suggestion they might give up their protective solution. Understandably, they resist, usually, altering their avoidance behaviour. However, there is no resolution for any enduring relief from anxiety without exposure. Confronting the awareness of some threatening possibility and managing the emotion and sense of threat is the sine qua non of treating anxiety disorder. Managing anxiety is about exposure in the end. So, what do we do when we're working with children and adolescents? As I said, I'm just going to mention these things, but it'll come out a little bit more when I talk about the parents. We're going to help them contain emotion, develop realistic thinking, develop courage and self-belief, make plans to approach situations that arouse threat, recognise the realistic meaning of their emotion, and sit with threat rather than act to escape or avoid it. Undertake exposure activities that provide practice. And importantly, all the above things go together. And they go together with persistence, practice and patience. As Lisa said, it can be a long journey. We are talking about skill development, not simply symptom removal. This is why it's sometimes good to get in early. It should be said that separation anxiety is more commonly associated with other forms of anxiety later in life. It's not to say that all youngsters with separation anxiety go on to have other anxiety disorder. It's just that it's more common among those who display early separation anxiety than it is in the general population. So, I'm just going to say a few things mainly about parents of children and a bit about parents of adolescents if I get time, but stop me if I'm going over. Because there are differences in the leverage that parents enjoy in childhood and adolescence. In childhood, the role of the parent is to nurture, stimulate and protect. At a behavioural level, the role is more active than it is later on. Children, in turn, are centred on the idea they are under the guidance and authority of their parents. Therefore, parents should take this authority on confidently and with a comfortable sense of their inherent authority. It's not up for challenge. A bit of controversy, I would say, about sleep techniques, getting children to sleep at an early age, and furthermore when children develop anxiety. And I think in the case of anxiety, it's a little bit of a red herring to argue about whether there should be, the sort of the more leave them and let them sort of cry, if you like, versus keeping them close by. The real aim involves two things in the case of anxiety. I think we should think of anxiety, particularly in youngsters, but almost always, that anxiety is a question. At its most fundamental, anxiety is a question. Is this okay? Or is this dangerous? And children who are looking to their parents for guidance need to get the right answer. So that's one thing. And the second idea is we are developing skills, not removing symptoms. Hence, I would say in respect of getting children to school or getting them to remain in their own rooms, what is helpful is for the parents to take a hand toward what we'll call exposure and not to be concerned at the pace of improvement. Create success. So, they put the child back in their room, you'll be right, and then the child comes back and screams, no, 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 no. And then the parents might say, you'll be right, come on, back you go. No, 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 no. And this is fine if we think that we're developing a skill, we're encouraging a child's independence. So you might try that 5 times and then you'd say, well done, we did good practice and we'll do some more tomorrow. Come in and sleep with us. And then the next day you say, now we'll do a bit better today, and you will create success and you will be encouraging. And the same with school. The leverage, of course, in primary school is the parents can be a bit more actively involved and they can, attend and take the child to, and you can build progressively. Thanks. So this is a fundamental thing, I feel. Parents should not be disheartened when progress is slow. Understand that exposure helps and create successes. Communicate. Encourage children to face intolerable thoughts. There is a tendency when children are very anxious for parents to move into a more protecting mode. But I think it's better to be mindful that we want to encourage their independence, even though they are not sure themselves. It's okay to talk about the scary things. The parent is not a scary person, even though the subject might be scary. So when the parent talks about it, it's not damaging. Discuss values. What's important? What friendship is about? How small things add up to success. Children are often quite obsessive and preoccupied with their anxiety. A parent can bring it back to something more realistic and positive. Okay, I've heard your top 2 worries for the day. Now, what are our important values? You could ask the child. Okay, friendship, building skills, caring for others. Let's see, tell me where they showed up today. These things can be in a very small, unnewsworthy way. Try not to be drawn into the obsession that anxiety brings. Help reduce self-obsession. Avoid submitting to any irrational or unreasonable actions. Mum, be there at 3:30. No later. It's unwise for parents to agree to, yes, I will. Yep, I'll be there. I don't think that's wise. And we can understand why. And the child might be angry and interpret it as abandonment or being attacking. And the parent would say, no. You're misunderstanding. I didn't abandon you. I have trust and confidence in your ability to manage. Establish and uphold family rules. Anxiety is never cause for any allowance given in the accountability for family rules. If the child's in their distress, hit out, break things, do things that are against the rules. I've got 4 family rules for living. They should be kept in the face of anxiety. Value separation for everyone in the family. Encourage and be available for good deeds. All the things we are doing are working at those 2 poles, encouraging independence and helping them establish a sense of safety and security without having to be in the home or side by side. And the other thing we're working on is that we know that thinking influences how meaning is attributed to events, so we want to work with their thinking. Independence, safety, thinking. I'll just say very briefly in closing that these things are similar in adolescence, and what I've just talked about reminds us that it's never too early to inoculate children against anxiety. So these things apply even if the anxiety is not really evident. Because you don't have the same leverage in adolescence to be so active and guiding and directing. During adolescence, there is greater focus on the relationship and encouraging a sense of partnership in the adolescent's further growth. The time for forcing one's will upon youngsters, if it was ever truly there, is gone. So that the support now builds on the work done on independence and security during the childhood years. Often the difficulty for parents is to maintain the sense they are being effective and able to see optimism on the horizon while they're unable to take responsibility for making things happen. It's generally reassuring to adolescents who are without confidence and in emotional turmoil that parents are able to absorb the uncertainty of prolonged inactivity and hesitation. Flexibility often can be helpful to consider alternatives that, whilst not ideal or progressive, do offer some prospect of getting some movement happening. There's a difference between disconnected resignation and interested, willing, albeit uncomfortable acceptance of the current situation, such as an adolescent anxious about leaving home, attending school or social groups. They may accept volunteering with animals or doing something with the elderly or working with an adult family friend, doing an online course, art, creative writing, film. These things are not necessarily solutions, but they are indicative of a flexibility, and this is creating success adolescent style. Yes, that was great. We put you in your room twice tonight, we'll do it 3 times tomorrow. That's creating success child style. And we're looking to create success adolescent style. And often it's slowly, patiently, and with perseverance. It's much easier to manoeuvre a car that's moving slowly than one that's stuck in the mud. I'll stop there. I think I've had my time. Thank you.